My main job is training dogs, training people and handling sheepdogs. The idea for this video came actually from everyday life because a lot of people tell us, I don't want a young dog, I want a trained or a semi-trained one, or they say I want to rent a dog because I will only work on the alpine summer pastures and I don't want to have a dog all year round. People are looking for a dog and some of them come to us and ask for information. They've already found out, of course, that it's quite difficult to find well-trained sheepdogs, but it's also difficult to judge and know whether the dog I have a look at on a farm is really suitable for work on alpine summer pastures. These are difficult challenges, and today we are trying to make the situation a bit clearer for you in this video. Before we get to the video, we would like to say something about our leaflet, Working Dogs in Agriculture. In this leaflet, you can read what types of working dogs there are. So there are collecting style dogs, heelers and continental style dogs, and also livestock guarding dogs, but that's another story. We have decided to focus here on collecting style dogs. We want to introduce this type because there's the so-called aptitude test of the Swiss Sheepdog Society for them, and we think that this is a test which shows quite well what a dog working on a farm or on an alpine summer pasture needs to know. And therefore we are focusing on collecting style dogs, meaning Kelpies and Border Collies. Now we would like to show you a video and tell you why certain things are important on alpine summer pastures, or what you should look out for when you are looking for a dog for alpine summer pastures. What is relevant and what should help make the content of the video a little easier to remember are 3 tasks that we want to see. The first is command. Do the commands work? Do you say come by and the dog goes left, or do you say come by and the dog shoots to the right? And in what quality does the dog execute the commands? That's relatively simple. So does he go to the left or does he go to the right? Can he be stopped? Does he walk forwards? Can he be called back to you? We have a total of 5 basic commands. After that, there's a task we call distance and speed. Above all, we look at how the dog handles the sheep. So can he take a step back? Is he decent in what he does? Is he moving the sheep? How does he move the sheep? And then there's the 3rd task I would have called harmony. If you look at the exercise, then it's the gut feeling that says that worked and it felt like it worked well for me. We looked for a practitioner who could work with his dog in the video, or in other words, run the course. So we have Marcus, who we will see in a moment, the farmer who works cows and sheep with his dogs. A practitioner through and through, and that would now be an example for somebody who wants to rent a dog, and in this scenario he runs the test and shows what his dog can actually do. We look at what we like and where we have a good feeling and where we have the feeling it could be a little bit better, to be able to decide afterwards if this would be a dog that we could use in an alpine pasture. Let's look briefly at the structure of this test. We filmed this from a bird's eye view. On the top right, you can see the net into which the sheep get into. That's like a pen or a night pen on the alpine pastures. Then we have a slalom course with various plastic posts. The idea behind all this is that we can simulate moving from one pasture to another. So the human, the shepherd, walks ahead and the dog actually drives behind. The sheep follow independently. And then at the bottom right of the picture, we have a chute or a footpath. This can also be very practical on the alpine pasture when you have a dog that can help you get the sheep through a chute. So this, well, briefly, that was the structure, and now we come to the first task. That would be the penning out. Imagine coming to the night pen in the morning and you want to let the sheep out. You open the pen, send the dog to the back, and the dog should then bring the sheep out of the pen. Well, we now take the role and the perspective of the person who wants to hire a dog. So, what is the dog capable of? This means that we must focus our attention on the following. Do the dog and the human harmonize with each other? How do they handle the sheep? Are they doing a decent job? What we just saw was that Marcus sends his dog, opens the gate, and the dog runs back in a wide curve, and we see that the sheep already react to the dog. The dog should run a little further behind the circle, but the dog realizes that this is a 4.5-year-old dog. He realizes that he has less impact behind the net. He sneaks up to the sheep a little, and it's capable that he's walking very calmly. And Marcus is now walking ahead so that the dog levels out the sheep behind the human so that he can then close the gate well. So actually leave the barn and then close the door again. And here you can add to that, the dog ran outside the net, but depending on the size of the pen, the size of the night pen, you can of course also run the dog inside the pen. The dog does not have to stay outside the pen. As I said earlier, the next task is driving the sheep behind the handler. It's like a change of pasture or a sector change on the alpine pasture. What we want to see here is that the dog works behind the shepherd as independently as possible. This is also the exercise that most shepherds and also dog owners have in mind when they think of the border collie. That's what you may need most of the time on the home farm. You want to change pastures, walk ahead, and the dog drives the sheep behind you and makes sure that no sheep get lost, but he should also make sure that the sheep don't just run past the shepherd. So you can now see relatively well with the giant slalom that is run here that there is a straight element. Now the dog has not made such a nice flank. The person is walking across the field. The dog levels out, and at some point there is a turn, and then we want to see that the dog gives some space in the turn and also leaves the sheep alone during turning, because the dog has a slightly higher basic speed during the turns. So the person goes to the right again and walks down between these two posts. These two posts are more of an orientation aid. The dog levels out to the left and then takes care that the sheep are running after the human again. So right here, he runs out now. He could have walked out a little further, but the number of sheep always plays a role. You know, are there only 4 sheep, or are there 500 sheep, or even more? You always have to weigh things up a bit. Is the dog just running a bit tight because he does this out of habit, or is it tight and he jumps into the flock in every turn or not? So here the question is it decent? Is it harmonious? Does it suit the situation? Okay, the next task we see is stabilizing. In this exercise, all 3, dog, sheep, and handler, first stop so that the sheep are stabilized, and then you want to see that handler and dog change position without the sheep being moved much. That sounds relatively simple. With this you can see relatively quickly whether a dog has a good flank or not. The dog that pulls in every time in the flanks will have trouble keeping the sheep calm here. But here we see a very nice example. The sheep are stabilized. The human starts to walk his curve. Of course, the human takes a little longer than the dog. The dog realizes at some point that the human is coming, pushes himself away from the human and towards the balance point. So the dog walks to the opposite side, stops again, and the handler makes sure that everything stays calm, and then the stabilization with change of size is actually completed. The next task we see is the drive. Here we want to see that a dog can drive the sheep away from the shepherd, and it should also be able to make a right and left turn. That sounds relatively simple, but with many dogs, this is not quite as well developed as the driving behind a person, because you do driving behind much more often than a clean drive away from you, but it's not a basic requirement either that every dog can drive away from you perfectly. But again, you can take a look at the task command. Does the dog accept commands? Does he follow them? The dog is now more on the right side of the sheep. Now he has to turn back towards the handler, again to the left. He has now done this very well. Now he can see that he's driving the sheep away to the side, and now we actually want them to go a little further back. And now we've seen very briefly that everything's whirling up a bit. The dog has now made a left flank, but qualitatively not quite as nice as it could have been. It's not a tragedy when we look at it in the alpine situation. The important thing is that it works, and here, of course, the better a dog is trained, the better he changes directions, of course. You can lead him faster because he is well trained and he understands his basic commands well. Now you can see that he's extremely well on track. The sheep are running, but they are also running because the dog really influences everything from behind. Now we have seen that the dog makes a right flank and the sheep tilt as a reaction to the left. The same on the other side. The dog goes over to the left, he can be controlled and he can also be stopped. These are the relevant points. Okay, so goal achieved. They say you want to see 30 to 50 meters. That is what you want to see. Can you send the dog and stop him without him only running after the sheep and just trying to bring the sheep back? Because that's something that you don't really like on the alpine pastures. Then we perhaps come to one of the most important tasks on the alpine summer pastures. This is the gathering of the sheep. In the alpine context, you actually need that a lot. There are also different group sizes that you will have together. A collecting style dog is great when you have to collect smaller groups. Now, the gathering consists of 3 elements. So you're talking about the 3 components: outrun, lift, and fetch. Let's take a look at this sequence. What do the outrun and lift look like? We can already see before the dog is sent off whether the dog moves to the right or to the left. So the dog is on the right side of the shepherd. He will therefore also be sent to the right and ideally run towards and around the sheep in an inverted pear shape. He should be quite far away from the sheep, especially at the back. That also has something to do with fairness towards the sheep. It is very important that the dog gets as far back as possible, not too far, but far enough back to the sheep so that the sheep see that he's coming and they have time to prepare for this. The dog that comes extremely straight and fast can steer things up very quickly. He might have faster movements. This makes everything a bit unpredictable, and these are things that you don't really want in steep terrain. Now the dog completed his outrun and lift. We also saw the lift. This was very good. Now we are in the fetch, or bringing the sheep to the handler. What can often help is to simply slow the dog down here. That brings us back to the task of distance and speed. It's actually very good when you have a dog that you can simply tell on the mountain, slow down. And then sometimes they look on their own for a good path for the sheep. Sometimes they're just a little overzealous. And it's good if you can tell him or her, hey, slow down, basically you're on the right track. You just need to give the sheep some time. You can see that extremely well in this team's fetch. It's a moderate terrace, it goes slightly uphill, you can't see that very well now. The dog has to push a little bit as soon as the handler sees that the sheep are moving well in his direction. In most cases, a command comes, a help that says, hey, slow down. Now you can see that the dog is running extremely calmly behind and takes care to bring the flock of sheep forwards to the human without steering them up too much. So now we have the whirling up again very briefly, a very small flank, a little too pointed, not very nice, but now we've also seen that this helped to move the sheep well. It doesn't always have to be like this. The penultimate task in the aptitude test is the handling system, for instance, for a footpath. Here we want to see that dog, sheep and handler can walk towards this funnel-shaped formation and that dog and handler can work the sheep together through it without causing too much stress. It depends a bit on whether the sheep already know the handling system or not. The less they know about it, the more cautiously you have to approach it, so that the beginning of the group really walks in. The sheep need to see what it's all about. That means they need time, so keep everything a little calm. Man and dog each secure on site, and as soon as you see that the sheep are walking nicely, make sure that the dog doesn't push too hard. The biggest mistake you can make here is when you see the sheep walking in, that you then send the dog fully into the back of the chute so that the sheep feel too much pressure at the back and then actually tumble out the back again. We can see that quite clearly here. Marcus makes sure that there's a bit space at the front. He makes the dog push and Marcus goes with the front runners. He releases the plug from the funnel and thus gives space again so that the sheep can follow. And what we see now is the dog lying around a lot. Now you can say, great, now the human is doing all the work, but it's also not mandatory that the dog ends up tired after this exercise, provided that you can leave him lying down. And for us to judge the quality, it is, of course, also a good sign that we see Marcus is concentrating on the sheep and the dog still staying in place. I think this exercise is great, even if, as you say, the dog lies down a lot, but you can see quite well, does he follow his commands? Can he stay? Can he just come forward a little bit to push? Now we come to the end of the test. This is the penning. We want to see that the shepherd can open the net and then send the dog out to fetch the sheep, and then bring the sheep in at a good pace. The shepherd then closes the net again, and then the day is over and the work is done. Let's take another look at the video. You can see it here again. The handler has placed his dog and the sheep remain calm and stabilized. That is also a special skill, although it looks easy that everyone is in the right place, that the sheep don't stick to the handler. The handler has enough time to open the net. With a large herd, he would now open one more post. He now prepares himself nicely, also lies his dog on the right side. This means that he now sends the dog to the left. He gives the dog a left-hand command again, and as soon as the sheep start walking towards the opening, he slows down the pace again. The sheep realize where the dog is and walk away from the dog towards the human, and the handler now takes care that the sheep walk back into the pen as evenly as possible. That looks very harmonious now. So here you can see that the dog does what the human says. The two help each other and it works, and it looks like it's not the first time they've done it. Okay, so that would be the sequence of a so-called aptitude test. And now you have also seen, if you want to assess a dog, it doesn't actually take much. We have used the following materials here: a net, a few panels for the chute, and some posts for direction, so we can see what kind of turns we can make. This way we can already assess a dog's ability in a relatively short time. We have a first impression of whether the whole thing can work or not. And what you also said is that these are elements that you need to set everything up, and the important thing is that you pay attention to whether the dog can follow his commands. Does he know come by, away, forward, stop, and come back? Those are the 5 basic commands. And what about distance and speed? Does he have some sheep sense? Can he adjust? How fast can he go? How far away does he have to stand? And you should just have a good feeling for that when you watch the dog and his handler. You should be able to imagine that you can have a harmonious summer and that you don't always have to be alert all the time to control the dog. That's what we would like you to take away from this video.